If you've ever heard of the fictional universe Warhammer, chances are you probably have heard about the Grey Knights. Now, stick with me here, but what if I said we're going to turn some melted plastic into a Grey Knight's helmet? Now, if you're not familiar, the Grey Knights are essentially a covert ops unit from outer space. And if you're wondering why I'm hiding, that's because whenever they get done fighting with whoever they're fighting alongside, they leave no survivors. So in theory, even making this video is not going to end well for me. But enough yapping, let's get into the build. This file came from Galactic Armory's Patreon and took about 35 total hours to print at 16mm layer height. I did split this print across 3 printers, so it was much shorter, and I used about 1 kilogram of PLA filament all the way through. This one can't be worn, so it's not going outside, otherwise I would have used PETG. Now, these layer lines were already hard to see, but to really smooth them out, we sanded this helmet with a 120 grit, then 220 grit, and then finally a 320 grit sandpaper before it was good to go. Now that we've got the worst part of the process out of the way, we have 2 big steps left to do before we can get this thing painted. First, we have to wash the print to get the excess microplastics off. Trust me, you do not want to prime a print that has a bunch of plastic and junk just all over it, because then that shows up under the primer. To do this, we just take our sanded print with a little bit of dish soap and some cool water, and we just wash it like it was anything else. But just as importantly, you have to leave time for it to dry. I'm a little lucky by being in Arizona, so drying only takes about, an hour. It's super dry and super hot here, so I don't have to worry about it too much, but it's good to give it about 2 to 4 hours. And once all the parts are dry and good to go, now we assemble. And for the assembly, I use JB Weld Clear Weld. It's a 2-part epoxy, and it sets in 5 to 10 minutes. Now you do have to give it quite a few hours to fully cure, but in terms of setting the pieces together to where they won't move, that happens super quick. But this stuff is ridiculously toxic. It stinks, it's gross, it's dangerous. So make sure when you're using it, you have both gloves and a ventilator, respirator, venta mask thing. Amazon, cheap, safe life. Now this process is fairly easy. All you do is mix the resin and hardener 1-to-1 in a container and apply it to your model. Technically you should measure it, but I've been using this long enough that I just eyeball it. Just make sure that when you're applying it, you're using a disposable tool, because it is going to harden over your brush and you will not be able to use it again. I prefer to use Q-tips or cheap paint brushes that I'm not going to be able to use for actual painting any longer. I guess you could also use like popsicle sticks, but I just don't have any. After that, all you have to do is slap it onto the print wherever it connects and wait. But that only takes 5 or so minutes until the bond is strong enough to hold it on its own. Just remember, you'll have to give it anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to fully cure. I also recommend sanding the connectors a little bit to make the resin have something to grip onto just a little bit easier. Now that we've got this thing assembled, it looks absolutely insane. Now, admittedly, with the risk of the Grey Knights coming after me, it kind of looks a little bit like a teddy bear, but I'm going to keep that to myself. I do have to say, for as cool as it looks, unfortunately, this is about as good as it fits. My eye is right here. This isn't something that I'm actually going to be able to wear. This is more of just going to be a decoration piece, something I'm going to put up on the wall, or maybe in my living room, because, everybody needs to know about the Grey Knights. Okay, this video's getting risky, so let's move on to the painting process. I start with my 2-in-1 filler primer because it lays on thick and is easy to sand down for a smooth finish. The key is to get this in all the nooks and crannies, spraying from about 8 inches away. I personally don't worry too much about drips because we're going to sand it anyways and those will get smoothed out, but it's best to use thin, even coats around the entire helmet. Now, as you can see, there's still some texture up here and some spots around the helmet that no amount of primer would fill. It just can't do it. So this is where we introduce Bondo Spot Putty. This stuff is fantastic for filling in gaps, but make sure you wear a ventilator and do this outside. It's stinky, it's toxic, and the smell lingers. I personally apply it with some spare EVA foam, but you can use a sponge, a glove finger, or anything in between. I'm not your dad. When you do apply it, you don't need a ton, just enough to cover any holes and gaps that are in your model. It's also okay if it looks rough and textured at first, because after we apply it, we're going to end up sanding it down. Just make sure that you give it enough time to dry. Here, I do go a little bit overboard, and I honestly don't think you'll actually need this much, but my philosophy is if we're going to sand it, better be safe than sorry. I let this dry overnight to make sure it's cured all the way through, and then we start by sanding it with a 320 grit and then move on to a 400. The goal of spot putty really is just to fill the gaps, so it's okay to sand it back down until it's smooth. Also, with these caked up areas and tight crevices, I have this cheap set of sanding files that I got from Amazon to bring out that detail. And for the final part of smoothing the Bondo, I do grab a little bit of water to do one final wet sand. The water mixes with the Bondo to make it more of a paste and really get it smooth. I don't know if you're actually supposed to do this, but I do this on every single helmet, and so far it's worked really well. And for the final stretch before actually painting this thing, we give it a quick wash once again to get all the excess Bondo off, and then prime it once more. Priming is the same thing, so we'll skip that part and jump to the wet sanding after. Remember, we add one more thin coat of the filler sandable primer and then grab our 600 grit and 1000 grit sandpaper. Don't press too hard when you do this because it is possible to sand off too much primer. Just make sure you get the entire helmet and either wear gloves or prepare to wash your hands. With all the priming and sanding that we could possibly need finally done, we are on to my favorite part, and that is the painting process. This is the part where you can get as detailed as you want, and I kind of tend to go a little bit overboard, but that's fine. The one issue I was having though is when you look up Grey Knight helmets, they're all gray. And that's perfectly fine, but I feel like it shouldn't just be aluminum silver. Now the Galactic Armory image has this really sick shade of metallic blue, but I just couldn't find a matching color anywhere, so we're gonna go with two rattle cans. We're gonna go with an aluminum metal, and then we're gonna go with the gold for the trim. For the base coat of paint, I used Rust-Oleum's aluminum metallic. I honestly regret filming this with the sunlight because you can't even tell it's spraying on, but I promise that it is. For this part of the process, I lay down two thin coats with about 15 minutes in between so I don't get any drips or pooling. And the final product looks pretty good. It's hard to tell the difference from the primer, but I promise it's there. I just had to make sure that everything was actually painted. Now, for part 2, we have to be a little bit more meticulous. We'll be masking off everything except the trim to paint that gold, and for these details, I use Tamiya masking tape. They're just better. This tape comes in multiple thicknesses and doesn't leave any residue after you pull it off. Now, the only downside to Tamiya tape is this stuff is mad expensive, so for the rest of the helmet, I use cheap masking tape and paper. You can technically use plastic wrap as well, but at the time, I just had paper in my workshop. Ultimately, you want to be really patient and pay really good attention because while it may not look like a lot at first while you're masking off the helmet, anything that you miss is going to stick out like a sore thumb when you paint whatever next color it is. So in this case, if I miss anywhere with masking tape, that gold is going to be obnoxious. And to actually paint the trim, I use this metallic gold color, which, let me say, I have used this in the past, so I thought it would work. But that's what I get for thinking. Literally, as soon as this spray hit the helmet, I hated it. So we did what any good creator would do, and we literally just kept going. We're in too deep, I'm gonna finish it. Ultimately, I technically should have tested this paint on a spare part, but I think this is still fixable. And here it is in all of its detailed glory. It is finally time to get this thing unwrapped. This part's like Christmas because we've got this thing wrapped up, the trim's all detailed, and it's good to go, but now we have to demask it. And if it doesn't look sick, then I guess you won't actually be watching this video. Okay, I'm just kidding. You're gonna see what it looks like regardless, but I don't even know yet. The one thing I do have to say is, honestly, the gold is a little bit more bronze than just gold that I was going for. Like I said, there's no actual color scheme. This is just what was on the Galactic Armory image. But I didn't find out till after spraying it that it was a little bit more of a copper bronze. So alright, so this last step is arguably the most important, and it is time to get this thing weathered. Now I know canonically nobody lives to tell the story of fighting with the Grey Knight, but we can at least put 2 and 2 together and assume their armor is f***ed up. First off, gold isn't flat. It has a texture with some depth to it, so we're going to use a lighter shade of gold to bring that out. This is Pro Acryl's bright gold color, and I'm going to dry brush it all over the trim. This is where we start to add a little bit more realism. Thankfully, the process is quite simple. We put some paint on the brush, and we dab it off onto a paper towel, and then we just splat it down all over the surface, and I mean everywhere. On the trim, just the trim. Just don't go too overboard, because we don't want to fully cover the base coat. We just want to add this as a layer on top. Once the gold is fixed, it's finally time to actually get messy. We're going to take this Army Painter Dark Tone and apply it all over the helmet. This is a pre-made wash. Technically you could make your own, but I really like the consistency and the strength of Army Painter. Just make sure to go slow and do it in sections, because you're going to want to lightly dab it off with a paper towel to give it a more natural look. Otherwise, it's honestly just going to look like a bunch of brush strokes. And I don't know much about the Grey Knights, but I'm pretty sure they weren't letting people paint onto their armor. A bonus tip, I'm extra careful to make sure that I get into all the cracks and crevices wherever dirt and gunk would actually pile up in real life. The best part is we're just having fun with this, so there's no objective right or wrong. You literally just keep on going until you're satisfied. Even then, if you screw up, you can just wipe it off and start again. Before we go any further, I've got to say this next part is the scariest part of this project. I heated up my hot iron to cut right into the helmet. The goal here was to make it look like he actually took some real battle damage, or at least the best we could replicate that when it comes to 10-foot tall space soldiers. And when I say scary, my thought process was if I screw this up, I have to reprint entirely, which would take another 30 or so hours. But I would call it a success, and after the actual destruction, I decided to throw some silver paint on top just to not reveal the plastic. I also trimmed off some of the excess plastic that melted just because while I did want it to look like it was battle damage, I didn't want it to look like it was done by an 8-year-old. Now, after all that hard work and a couple screw-ups here and there, here it is in all of its glory. I am super stoked with how this came out. Now, I was absolutely terrified to burn this scar into the helmet, but what is life if you're not taking a little bit of risk, because it ended up coming out insane. Honestly, I'd imagine in the Warhammer universe, if anything is slashing a Grey Knight's helmet like that, it's probably going to leave a lot bigger of a mark, but in relative size to the face, I think it still looks pretty good. Now, we did manage to fix the issue that I was having with that copper brown that showed up on all the trim, but I think if I were to do this again, I'd definitely come out of the gate with a different gold to begin with, and even then, I might come back to this helmet and give it a little bit more love in the weathering process. If I ever revisit this one in the future, I'm definitely going to put some LEDs in the eye sockets just to give it that little glow and make it a little bit more menacing. With that being said, if you felt like you've learned something today, or if you just enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing, as that helps support me and the channel. And of course, feel free to suggest any builds that you might want to see in the future, because I have a lot of time and a lot of material, and also a lot of inspiration, but I also like being told what to do. I've really got to start thinking before I speak. Stay tuned for more 3D prints, robots, and cosplay, and until next time, we'll see ya.